because it has names, faces, places, all of the details, documentation, photos, social networks, organizational networks, and it explains that for every dollar in any currency that's in circulation in the official economy, there are $5 hidden away in that dope incorporated structure and offshore banks. The Queen of England is at the top of this, but it actually dope incorporated goes back to the Knights Templars and the Crusades. And the Knights Templars were the Crusaders, one of the groups who went to the Middle East, and the excuse for going to the Middle East to get Christians to support it was that they were securing the Christian relics in the Holy Land. What they were actually doing was using religion as a cover, just as they are now, to go to the Middle East and revive the Silk Road, which was a huge trading enterprise for thousands of years all across the Eurasian continent. And they wanted to revive it so that they could capture the revenue. They wanted the money from that very, very, very tremendously wealthy enterprise. And so the Knights Templars went back to Europe, and they were humanists. In other words, they supported self-determination or democracy, a democratic society. But they had a rogue group of Knights Templars who were monarchists, and they're the ones who ended up starting Dope Incorporated, and it was during the early 1700s when Britain wanted tea, silk, and porcelain. They wanted to trade their stuff with China, and China said, well, we'll sell you tea, silk, and porcelain, but we don't need any of your junk because we're 5,000 years old and we've already got everything we want. Yours is inferior. So you have to pay in gold or silver. And the British started paying in gold and silver, but then they didn't want to give China all their gold and silver. So what they did was they said, we'll take over India, we'll make it a colony, we'll grow opium there, and we'll grow it in Turkey, and then we'll have East India Company warehouses that warehouse the opium in India, and independent sea captains can come and purchase the opium balls and then take it to China in their fast clipper ships, because we don't want to do business in China with opium. It's illegal. Let the clipper ship captains bribe the customs officials in China and peddle their dope there, and then bring back tea and China and silk. So that's exactly what happened. And the Chinese suffered. Over 250 million people were addicted to opium in China during those years. The Chinese finally were able to expel the British around the end of the 1800s, and of course all the addicts had to die. And by the time of the Vietnam War, opium production was almost zero all over the world. However, when you look at opium production historically from 1800 to 2000, it's very obvious that the Vietnam War was to reintroduce and to refurbish the opium production in Southeast Asia. And traditionally, even during the Indian colonial period, the opium was grown in the very countries that we targeted in the Vietnam War, and that's Laos, Cambodia. Those countries are the biggest opium producers.
Well, now we have Afghanistan, and you know that just as well as our audience should know, our troops are there guarding the opium fields, and opium production is at bumper crop levels. And do you know if they're using depleted uranium on the Afghan civilians as well?
Oh, absolutely. The whole country is contaminated, and they have horrible cancer rates and birth defects, all the same thing that has happened to our soldiers and to NATO forces and to UN peacekeepers and to the population in Iraq and Yugoslavia. It's just a replay of all of that. And not only that, the British are growing opium in Afghanistan also, and that is where the highest violence is where the British are, because they're growing more opium than the U.S. is.
Yeah, what can we do as individuals to help protect ourselves and our families from the toxic effects of depleted uranium? Is there anything we can do?
Yes, there are lots of things that people can do. First of all, we have to get the radiation pollution, this constant point source of radioactive pollution, uranium pollution, turned off. And what we know is that in 1963, when the Partial Test Ban Treaty was signed, ending nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere by the U.S., Russia, and Britain, we know that the fish population in the North Atlantic recovered. It had declined 50% by 1963 in the 5 previous years because of all the radioactive pollution in the oceans. And most of that pollution was uranium, which is in all atomic bombs. And so in 5 years, prior to the Partial Test Ban Treaty being ratified and signed, the fishing population declined 50% in 5 years. They turned off the bomb tests, and within 4 years, the fishing catch was twice as high as it was before the bomb test started. So it actually doubled the fish population or the fishing catch, because that's a normal response to animal species when they're under some kind of pressure, a damaging thing like that, is that when that, whatever that pressure or that poison is removed, the population rapidly reproduces in order to restore their original population levels. So eventually the population reduced to the natural balance in nature to the same level it had been before bomb testing. So if we turn it off, life can go on and life can recover and reproduction can increase. But we have to stop it. And it takes tremendous international pressure and a very, very concerned president like President Kennedy, who was concerned about the effects of ionizing radiation from bomb testing on the American children. It was killing the American children. And even Eisenhower was told one day, he was in the White House, he was an Army general. He knew what weapons were. He was told by his staff not to go outside that day because it was raining. And he said, well, why shouldn't I go out if it's raining? And they said, oh, because it's washing all the radiation from the bomb tests out of the atmosphere. All across America, even the White House, even Washington, D.C., even the Atlantic. And it continued around and around the world. And wine companies actually measure the radiation in wines, and they can also date the wines from the radiation in the wines. It's also in all of the ice sheets, annual layers of ice in the Antarctic and in Greenland, in the Himalayas, in the Alps, in the Andes, in Hawaii, on top of the volcanoes. It's all over the world.
So what you're saying then is wherever we are, we're going to be exposed to depleted uranium. Something I take on a daily basis, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not giving out medical advice, but what diatomaceous earth is, what I take a tablespoon of it in the morning and a tablespoon of it in the evening, is supposed to draw out the toxins from your body, heavy metals and biological toxins, and it seems to work for me to keep my body, detoxed.
It's used in filters. It does filter out to some degree.
I've heard of calcium bentonite clay having the same kind of
right.
toxifying capacity that diatomaceous earth has.
What is even better is to prevent it from getting in the body. And so if you put a reverse osmosis filter in your water system coming into the house, you filter out the uranium and other heavy metals and other elements that you don't want in your body.